Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, starring award-winning real estate coaches and #1 international best-selling authors, Tim and Julie Harris. This is the #1 daily radio show for realtors looking for a no BS, authentic, real-time coaching experience. What's really working in today's market, how to generate more leads, make more money, and have more time for what you love in your life. And now your hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
Welcome back. Today we're breaking our own rule, and we're talking about something that actually might on the surface look and feel political. We're going to be drilling down on the two major presidential candidates' housing policies, and we're going to go through these points relatively quick, and we're going to cover the overview of what our points are because, frankly, there's a lot of information here. I put this together a couple weeks ago and spent a lot of time on it. And if you want the complete notes from today's podcast, just go to harrisrealestatedaily.com. harrisrealestatedaily.com is the only place you can get all of our notes from the podcast. You definitely want this information. We're doing as much facting in here, and it's not political. We're doing our best not to even sound remotely political. You'll have to judge how well we did at the end of this. If you can decide, what side of the aisle Julie and I would be voting on. Our goal is to make it so you can't tell because we're going to be as objective as we can. And not partisan about each of these housing policies. So let's get into the weeds, Julie.
So it is true that the U.S. housing market has been a focal point of economic discussion, particularly in recent years, as large institutional investors have increased their presence, with the 2024 presidential race highlighting housing policies from candidates Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Understanding the role of major players like BlackRock, Blackstone, and other large investors in the housing market is more critical than ever.
Now, here's what we're doing. We're going to structure this, and we're going to go through these points, like I said, relatively quick. The first thing we want, the myth that's out there, that we felt like we needed to directly confront was the idea that institutional investors are essentially what's stymieing the housing market. And I'm going to summarize it for you. And again, if you want the full notes, they're available for you at harrisrealestatedaily.com. The total number of homes in the United States is 80 million single-family homes. So what I did is I researched based on these criteria. I wanted to know what percent of homes, single-family homes, were owned by institutional investors that also owned over 100 single-family homes. Those were my search criteria. And guess what the number was? I bet you some of you were thinking it was a huge number. Nope, 1 to 2%. So 1 to 2%, using those criteria, of all single-family homes are owned by one of these institutional investors, which tells me and should tell you that they have virtually no effect on the value, the cost, the inflation that we've been experiencing in real estate. So the next question is what percent of the multifamily home sector do these big institutional investors own? And again, same criteria, more than 100 units again, this would be multifamily. And the answer there was 40 to 50%. So that makes total sense, right? REITs and all these other large institutional investors, they basically own 50% of all the multifamily residential units in the United States. Okay, that makes perfect sense. But what I really want you to understand, and hopefully you're really going to, allow yourself to be objective about this, is when you hear a politician, it does not matter who it is, talking about how institutional investors are the ones that have basically effectively caused this massive amount of inflation, aka appreciation in real estate, it just cannot be true because they simply don't own enough. I know in some markets like Charlotte, they do seemingly, there at least a few years ago, they were like part of probably what felt like 25% of all real estate transactions. But I'm here to tell you it's 1 to 2% of all residential single-family homes in the United States are owned by institutional investors. So please do not allow yourself to be lied to because you now know the truth. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to get into the exact housing policies of Harris versus Trump.
All right, so first we're going to talk about Kamala Harris, her housing policy proposals. First one is building 3 million new homes. Harris's plan to construct 3 million homes aims to alleviate the affordable housing crisis. This could significantly increase housing supply, particularly in high-demand areas, potentially lowering or stabilizing home prices. However, large-scale construction could lead to short-term inflationary pressures in the construction industry due to increased demand for labor and materials. Additionally, if funding comes from increased taxes, this could also contribute to broader economic inflation.
Now, conceptually, 3 million new homes sounds great, but where are they going to be building these 3 million new homes? It's not going to be where the houses are the most expensive. Why? Because land prices are too high, because the building and the zoning restrictions are too high, because it just isn't feasible to build a quote-unquote affordable home in the areas around the country where homes are the, essentially least affordable, right? So if there were actually a plan that was put in place to build 3 million new homes, it would have to be in areas that are not in the most desirable areas. And I'm going to give you guys a real quick history lesson. Some of you might be familiar with Sears homes. Sears homes were essentially homes that were literally bought through the Sears catalog and primarily by returning veterans from World War II. And what would happen is you'd go to your Sears catalog, you'd buy a home, and then the VA had actually helped to develop with private industry different subdivisions around, mostly in the Midwest. So like where Julie and I are from in Central Ohio, a community I grew up in called Colonial Hills was just as I just described. So depending on your rank, that would determine the size of the lot you could get. So if you were returning from World War II and you were a captain, you would have a larger lot. So you'd, just as I just said, you pick out your lot, then you go to your Sears catalog, you pick out your house, and then you would have the house, the pieces and the parts of the house delivered to the local train stop. Go there with your pickup truck, pick up all the bits and pieces, and then you and your buddies would build the house. That is literally how, or you'd obviously hire someone, but that is how a lot of these communities around mostly the Midwest were built. That's the reason a lot of the houses look the same. When you look through the MLS in Central Ohio and you go to Tennessee even, or you go to all these other communities that have all become very desirable because chances are now that they're all kind of located in central city areas that used to be rural. And, like where Julie and I used to sell real estate in the community I was just talking about, so you don't think that these are houses that are just cracker boxes. They're like 500,000, 600,000 now. So these little Sears homes that were built by returning veterans, for the most part, that is the type of success that can come from private and public partnership to actually expand in communities. But understand what I said. You're going to have a whole bunch of things that are not in place now. People are going to have to be willing to live in the less desirable areas. And they're going to have to be there's going to have to be industry that's going to be around to make it so that people can actually build more affordable homes. And all those things can definitely happen. 3D printed homes, you have a lot of really, frankly, cool houses that happen with
containers,
cargo containers, all kinds of cool things. It doesn't have to be stick built. Here in Puerto Rico, where Julie and I live, everything is built out of concrete, 7.5 or 7-inch walls with rebarb. That costs less if you look at the cost versus, say, for example, building with stick, okay, building with wood. So in any event, just because the government says they want to build 3 million homes, don't automatically just assume it's not feasible, because history has shown that it actually is. And if you go back further in history than that, which we won't do, you can actually see that for thousands of years, a lot of times big development has happened because the government has said, let's work together with private industry and build new developments. So now we're going to move on to a second one of Kamala Harris's housing policies with down payment assistance.
So her proposed down payment assistance, her proposal for a $25,000 down payment assistance program is designed to make homeownership more accessible for low and middle income families. This could boost demand in the housing market, particularly among first-time buyers, potentially driving up home prices if the supply does not keep pace with the increased demand.
So the problem with the down payment assistance program, and these have been around forever, this is not a new idea, is again, $25,000. If your average home price in the United States is $430,000 now, that's not going to get you enough down payment to buy a house. So where is that going to put you at in terms of your ability to buy something with $25,000? Is it going to be a check? Is it going to be a tax credit? I don't know. I mean, again, down payment assistance programs have been designed so that they'll help people who otherwise wouldn't, firefighters and school teachers traditionally have had programs like that in place so that they can work. And when implemented correctly, it actually effectively has a net gain into a community, because houses that maybe were, not in the greatest shape, or communities that were turning over but didn't have enough buyers to buy the homes, were then having an influx of, firefighters and teachers and policemen. So that's a good thing.
That's right. And by the way, did you know that there's supposed to be close to 1,000 different types of down payment assistance programs that already exist?
That's amazing.
It's just that nobody really promotes them, but you can find them on HUD.gov and look it up by zip code. Some of them, and to your point, there's lots of different ways to do this. It's all under the category down payment assistance program. But you remember when we sold real estate, there was down payment grants that a buyer didn't have to pay back. There were other programs that had special stipulations that they did have to pay back.
So the projected end price, so if you have a bunch of new buyers coming into a marketplace, obviously we're talking about lower end price points here. you're going to definitely see an increase in home prices because of specifically the housing payment. Every time you increase the number of buyers in a market, you're going to have an increase in the cost of homes. So when there's more buyers, you're going to have more, the home prices are going to go up. You can call that appreciation, you can call that inflation, but just understand there's no net benefit from a lot of these programs. But that said, having been a poor kid growing up in a relatively poor neighborhood, I will tell you that I was Zoe's age almost before, I was 7 or 8 before my parents stopped being tenants and they started being owners. And it makes an enormous difference. Living in a neighborhood that's mostly homeowners is incredibly more beneficial, especially when you're a little kid. Not to mention the fact that real estate is the number one way that people become first-generation millionaires in the United States. I don't know if you guys know that, but that is by, essentially, if you look at all the millionaires and you ask first-generation millionaires, how did they become millionaires? It's almost always real estate. It's not winning the lottery or, any of these other things that, again, people want you to believe. It's definitely real estate. So owning a home, generally speaking, is a huge win. And more people that can win at a higher level, the better is for our country. So there's those couple things. So we talked about the impact on home prices and rents. Now, again, the next section that we hear this mostly coming from Harris is that she talks a lot about cracking down on corporate landlords. We just gave you guys the facts on that. So you determine whether or not corporate landlords owning 1 or 2% of all single family homes in the United States really is an issue. I don't see how it could. So, that's the next section in our notes. And again, if you want our notes and a great deal of analysis that we did, please do consider subscribing to our newsletter, harrisrealestatedaily.com, and you get our long form notes. So the next thing we're going to talk about is Trump's housing policy proposals.
So the first one is deregulation to spur development. Trump advocates for reducing regulations that stifle housing development. By making it easier and cheaper for developers to build, Trump aims to increase the housing supply, potentially lowering prices. However, rapid deregulation could lead to speculative development, which might increase home prices in the short term as investors buy up available land and properties.
Now, this housing policy, let's think about this. This is going to make it less expensive for developers and builders to build more affordable single-family homes, right? By making it so if you look at, for example, if you're building a house in, it doesn't matter where, Austin, Texas, your hard costs, before you even, let's say you find a big parcel of old farmland and you wanted to develop it and you had to put up all the regulation, all the, different expenses and fees. By the time that lot actually has a sign on it waiting for a buyer to buy the lot, how much money has already been spent just to get that thing market ready? It's extraordinary. And most developers, what they do is they double the hard costs that they have. So when you see a $400,000 lot or a $200,000 lot, the actual development costs were substantial. So you got to ask yourself, if those development costs were less, would the actual lot costs go down? Of course it would. Market forces would, through competition, cause the prices to drop. So if you want a way to really make it so that long-term home development becomes, especially in more affordable price points, becomes more viable, make it so more people want to build homes that are more affordable. That's the number one thing. The incentive structure is out of alignment right now. So, Julie, the projected impact on home prices and rents with deregulation.
Well, increased supply could lead to lower or stabilized home prices over time, depending on the speed and the scale of the development. Rents could decrease as more housing becomes available, but this would depend on the location and the type of the development, of course. So that's going to be an it depends type of answer.
Now, this next point is kind of controversial, but I thought it was interesting, and I really spent a lot of time researching specifically what this meant. I'll read this point, Julie.
Okay.
So Trump wants to open federal lands for development. Now, I hope that doesn't mean Yellowstone.
Right.
But there was no specifics on this. But then when I started researching this, I found out there's federal land everywhere that is oftentimes not even being used. And I'm talking about big swaths of land.
Hundreds of thousands of acres.
Exactly. So Trump's proposals to open federal lands for private development could increase the supply of affordable housing. However, this strategy might face opposition from environmentalist groups and local communities concerned about land use. Of course, that's true. All right, Julie, next point.
All right, so the projected impact on home prices and rents, well, if successful, that opening of federal lands for development, it could lower land costs and in turn reduce home prices, particularly in regions with high land prices. Rents could also decrease as the developments increase the supply of rental units. Again, I think that totally depends on where we're talking about. Think about someplace like Seattle with a huge amount of Washington State Being federal, that could be less expensive land cost, more development, more houses, and maybe impact prices.
Now, Trump has been on record talking about opposition to rent control and zoning reform. And really, the bottom line is what you need to look at is the fact that what a lot of the proposals that are coming out of the Republican side of things are designed for a longer term sustainable housing recovery, because it's all given incentives for folks to start building homes again. For folks to start building homes again, not because they're getting subsidies from the government, but because they're essentially able to make more profit. You guys see the major difference? So one is the government's using money as a cudgel, hypothetically, and the other essentially is making it so that the barriers to entry for new developers and builders, and then ultimately buyers to buy homes, is lower. So you have to decide what side of the fence you're on. So now we're going to talk about, again, there's a lot more detailed notes that are waiting for you at harrisrealestatedaily.com. That's our daily newsletter. And now we're going to talk about the impact on real estate agents and brokers.
So the proposed policies of both candidates have significant implications for real estate agents and brokers. Kamala Harris's focus on government intervention, affordable housing, and tenant protections could lead to increased transactions and potential market disruptions, such as price inflation or reduced rental housing supply.
In other words, if you all of a sudden had a bunch of rental properties and, like, say, for example, we heard this proposal kind of came and went really quick, where they said there would be a limit on how much you could increase your rent every year. And that was like, you guys remember that was like maybe 3 weeks ago? Oh, there's this new policy where, landlords aren't going to be able to increase the rents by more than, I forget what the percent was. And my first thought was, okay, does that mean you're going to put a policy where the property tax can't go up? I think it was annual increases can't be more than 5% or something.
Yes, that's right.
So does that mean that my insurance costs are going to go up? My homeowners, or rather the
homeowners insurance.
Homeowners insurance, but increased taxes. How about increased cost of?
Well, our HOA has gone up, the whole thing.
Exactly. So if you're telling me, as a landlord, Julie and I own a lot of properties, you're telling me that I can't increase my rents every year, and essentially by more than 5%. What if my costs go up by 10%? Then I'm starting to be the one that's subsidizing the tenant to live in my property. That doesn't make sense.
That's a disincentive to investment.
Right. If you ultimately want to know which direction anything is going to go, just look where the incentive structures are. It's not brain surgery. So moral of the story is that if all of a sudden, you had a bunch of landlords that didn't want their properties anymore because they were losing money on them, that could have a very negative impact on the market. Because, and we're talking about renters now, there'll be fewer things for them to rent, which would lead to what? Landlords being able to increase their monthly rents because there's less supply for sale. So yes, it would free up some inventory for buyers to buy, but ultimately it would increase the cost of rental housing. That's just a fact. We've seen that happen in different communities where Julie and I have had coaching clients.
It's true.
Where they've tightened, condo developments and whatnot, where they try to get rid of renters. All right, so go ahead, Julie.
Now, Trump's emphasis on deregulation and free market solutions might spur development and increase sales, but could also maintain housing affordability challenges in high demand areas. Real estate professionals have to consider how these policies affect their business models, commission structures, and client bases. For instance, increasing homeownership through down payment assistance might bring more first-time buyers into the market. At the same time, deregulation could lead to more development opportunities and greater competition among agents. What that makes me think of is multiple spokes in the wheel, work first-time buyers and work with builders. If that's what you see as a result of any of these policies, it's not just one solution. It's knowing what's going on and taking what the market is willing to give you. If you see a ton of development, but you don't know anything about new construction, that's where you need to take, some effort.
What makes me really sad, stick around. What makes me really sad about what's going on in the market ultimately, and Julie and I, when you and I started selling real estate, that we had first-time buyers that were in their 40s.
Yes.
And what had happened is they were coming out of a long-term economic cycle where inflation or interest rates, all these things. So even though they would have liked to have bought when they were in their 20s, they couldn't afford it when they were in their 20s. They finally got their finances in the market, finally was able to help them to buy a home. That wasn't the government. That wasn't the government giving them a handout. That was essentially them having to wait because for whatever reason they couldn't afford it. We're going to see that same cycle happen again.
The average age of the first-time buyer right now is already up to 38.
That's right. So it went from 28 to 38 inside what was the time frame? Like less than 5 years.
Yeah.
Well, I'm here to tell you guys that is really shitty for the communities
that you
all live in, because it has been proven countless times that a community benefits from people who own homes more than people who rent. And if you're renting, God bless you. I'm not saying anything bad about you. I'm just saying overall, generally speaking, if you look at the most stable, desirable communities in the United States, they're dominated not by tenants, but they're dominated by owners. And not to mention the fact that ownership provides essentially a surefire way to build long-term wealth. Most millionaires, most first-generation single-digit millionaires in the United States, guys, they earned their millionaire status not by the stock market, not by crypto, not by the lottery, but by owning a home. So,
in fact, homeowners are 40% more wealthy when you look at their assets than renters are. So that kind of proves your point with some facting right there.
yeah, so really what we're dealing with and why have homes really gone up, and again, we're doing our best to avoid being political here, is the inflation that's happened in the country over the last, really 4 years. It's been extraordinary, historic. It's not just the cost of housing, but the cost of everything has gone through the roof, and people's incomes just aren't keeping up. And unfortunately, for the reasons I just stated, that's probably going to be a long-term trend. You're probably going to see people that are having to rent in their entire lives. Again, that makes me genuinely sad to think about that. But that's probably the cycle that we're in. So what would actually fix that? The only thing that would even give those people a fighting chance of one day owning a home is if the inflation rate didn't continue to escalate. Do Julie and I see any reason? That way their incomes and their assets could catch up to their ability to buy a home. Do you guys see any reason to believe that inflation is going to actually meaningfully slow down? Do you really believe that? Where have you seen prices stabilize, let alone fall, anywhere in your lives? And we don't think it's going to happen either. So long story short, we're probably going to be in this cycle for a long period of time. And I do hope there's some real focused, I'm a small government type person. That may have just been political, right? I slipped.
Tuck that back in.
Yeah, I'll tuck it back in. But I would love to see the government actually give incentives to big developers and builders to start building affordable housing.
Well, the deregulation, I think, would be deregulation without making it like no zoning laws or something like that would certainly help get more inventory. Look at nearly every point, whether it's Kamala Harris or it's Donald Trump in their housing policy proposals, nearly every single point at some degree had to do with supply, didn't it?
Yep, that's right.
That's what we're trying to solve for right now. Now, there are places, mostly Texas and Florida and areas like that we have more supply. I know Texas has gone up, thousands of listings since year over year. But countrywide, we still need at least 1 million more homes. The question is, how are we going to get there? Where are they going to be? And how are we going to make it affordable? And I think to your point about inflation, over the past 3 years until, let's say, 3 years plus a year, it's been 48% appreciation in homes, okay? There's nobody in the world whose income has gone up by 48%, except maybe if you're in real estate, right? Okay, so the fact that now we're tracking for 5 or 6% appreciation, and I know that seems like the sky is falling to some of you listening that have got used to those crazy appreciation / inflation levels, that's actually a good thing for affordability. I think that's a positive. It's still going up, still keeping up.
Well, so ultimately,
it's not crazy.
Ultimately, this does come down to interest rates, but the unfortunate part of interest rates, again, think about this. Interest rates are definitely going to go down. As interest rates go down, is that going to increase the demand on housing or decrease it? It's going to increase it. So we're all in agreement interest rates are going to go down. We all agree that there's not, essentially there's a lack of housing available now. Now, what's that going to lead when there's more buyers in the market? Oh, I know, more inflation on home prices.
Right. It's baked in.
That's the cycle that we're going to be in. So is there a potential, relief to all of this with building more homes? Yes, there is. But people are going to have to be willing to live in areas right now that are maybe a little bit further away from, the central cities. And maybe they're going to have to be willing to work more virtually. There's going to have to be new forms of residential communities and new residential communities around the country that are being built. And I am incredibly excited to read about a lot of them. We talk about 3D homes on this podcast sometimes. We talk about, again, the different the different forms of real estate. But I'll tell you where you guys want to look. If you want to look where the next big housing boom is going to be, look to the places that are somewhat close to major cities that were primarily maybe second and third home or vacation home type areas. Those are the areas that are really going to take off. Because people can drive to the airport, there's hospitals there, there's all kinds of amenities there, there's schools there, and they can work remotely using Starlink. I know that doesn't apply to everybody, but it does apply to most people, and the cost of living in those communities is a lot less. That is where the migration trends are right now, and that's where I think personally, that's where definitely people are going to start realizing that's where the emphasis on new development needs to be.
Well, and there has been some discussion about whole new towns and cities being built. You know, we're not just stuck with the original however many thousands of cities there are, right? So I kind of hope that there will be some kind of, combination of government plus private industry that maybe creates new towns that are affordable because the land maybe came from, a national park or something that was cheap land, but then they built fresh. So everything is brand new. There were lots of jobs to go around. It was more affordable. That could be a really exciting thing. So that's a trend that I'm watching too.
Well, you and I are history nerds. And so like back in the day, right, there were whole communities that were built up around where the railroad towns were, right? And where the mining towns were. Now you're seeing like Elon Musk is building a community around in Austin, around where essentially he bought, I don't know if you guys have been to Austin to see the manufacturing facilities that he's built. It's just mind-bogglingly extraordinary when you see how big the damn plant is that's building the Tesla truck. It takes you like 20 minutes going 75 miles per hour just to drive past the damn thing. Well, so in the past, it was a lot of private industry that was essentially building homes for their workers, and that's going to probably be true as well. But we need to lower the regulation and make it so those types of things are more feasible. So this comes down to which set of proposals has the highest likelihood of providing the most benefit.
Well, if we're talking short-term impact, Kamala Harris's proposals might offer more immediate benefits, particularly for renters and first-time buyers struggling with affordability. Her focus on equity and targeted assistance could help address systemic issues in the housing market. Now, if we're talking about long-term impact, Donald Trump's proposals could offer more sustainable benefits over a longer term, especially if deregulation significantly increases the housing supply. By reducing barriers to development, his policies might help lower prices and rents, though these benefits might take longer to actually materialize.
Well, it is going to take longer because if all of a sudden, Trump deregulates a bunch of federal land and now it's open for development, it's going to take a long damn time to find all the, just to get the houses built. If you think about all the moving parts to have that happen. So overall opinion, and that's the last bit, and this is hopefully the only opinionative section in this whole thing that we have to offer to you guys.
Overall opinion, if the goal is to provide immediate relief to those most affected by the housing crisis, Kamala Harris's proposals seem likely to offer the most direct benefits, particularly in high-demand urban areas. However, these benefits may come with inflation risk and potential reductions in long-term housing supply due to overregulation. Now, if the goal is to stimulate broader economic growth and increase housing supply over the long term, Donald Trump's proposals could encourage more development, especially with regards to new construction.
So where would you summarize after having presented this to our thousands of listeners? Where's your mind go?
I think probably somewhere in between. I like elements of both, to be honest. I think it's good to have some level of down payment assistance, for example.
Let me level off there. So a lot of people are, and I think my reaction to this very topic maybe 25 years ago would have been what I'm about to present. Many people think it should just be the free market. Maybe many people believe the government shouldn't be involved in anything and all the rest of it. But the reality of it is that train long since left the station. If without the government being involved in mortgages, there basically would be no mortgage market.
This is true.
And now you could say, well, the government being involved in the mortgage market has starved out essentially competitive players in the mortgage market. And that probably is true. And by the way, a lot of these independent GSE mortgage lenders are starting to create a lot of new interesting mortgage programs that's going to help with lowering payments. Not all good, not all bad. Just it's going to be interesting to see how the mortgage market adjusts. But ultimately, what you've got to accept the fact is that in a country that's structured like ours, where I forget what percent it is, over 90% of all mortgages, I think it's like 97% are essentially Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA, something like that. It does make sense at this point that the government is going to have some kind of structure in place that's going to give incentives to developers and builders to start building homes that more people can buy. Because in a lot of these communities, the average sale price in the United States is $430,000, but you're looking at a lot of these communities where the average sale price is $1 million or over $1 million. And guess what? There's a lot of folks that live there that are never going to buy a home, which means they're going to miss out on the ability. One of the most surefire ways to build equity and long-term security for your family is through real estate. They're never going to even be on that train. If you want to really create a bifurcated country, you want to create essentially a lot of animosity that passes through generations. Well, that's how you do it. You make it so some people can buy a home and other people can't. So if I were the president, if I were running for office, I would create, and frankly, I don't think either one of the Harris or Trump have really drilled down on housing policy, you'd have to address it from both ends, supply and demand.
I agree with that, because it's not, absolutely, you create haves and have-nots and animosity and, different types of neighborhoods. There's so many things that are impacted by that, but it's also homeowners contribute overall so much more to the economy.
Well, so that's a good point. So after someone buys a home, now I don't remember, you probably know this number, but the average amount of money that someone, after they buy a home, between curtains and landscaping and home improvements, it was like 40 or 50
it's 40 grand. Yeah, that's right. I think over 2 years or something like that. But think about, the people that they employ, somebody that needs to do their landscaping, and maybe now they want a deck and they want a screened-in porch and all of these different things. That's helping the economy too. So by suppressing homeownership, because it's too expensive,
nobody
because it's hard to get a loan, nobody really benefits. It's not just the person who has to rent. It's also the person who would have had that carpentry job if that person had bought the house. It's also the guy that owns the furniture store where they would have supplied all the furniture to their house. It's all of these things intermingled. So I do think overall, homeownership is just better for the economy in so many different ways. So that's what we need to work towards. And in order for that to happen, we absolutely do need more supply, but it needs to be affordable supply.
And we're not talking about housing becoming an entitlement where everyone is owed a house. Reachable. Something that people can actually believe that they can actually accomplish in their lifetime. That's the whole ball of wax. And it's obvious that, it's so sad again that so many millennials and younger, they actually believe they're never going to be able to own a home again. And maybe they believe it just because they're thinking that BlackRock owns all the real estate and all these other political headlines. But, maybe some of you used to believe those things too, and now you're realizing that isn't true. Well, we need to actually have a real conversation in the real estate industry about what we can be doing collectively to address the real, the demand side and the supply side. All the conversation has been on the demand side, interest rates and different types of mortgages. Well, we now need to start addressing really what the true problem is, a long-term problem, which is the supply side. We need to start building these communities, and if the government needs to step in and the government needs to start providing incentives for folks to want to develop and build and take the risk, to build homes, and that's exactly what needs to happen, as it's happened historically in the United States before. And by the way, pretty much every civilization going back thousands of years, the government's always provided that lever into allowing people to become homeowners. So hopefully this is the information a lot of you guys need to start making clear and concise decisions about maybe who you'll vote for when it comes to the elections in a few months. But at the end of the day, these notes are available to you. Great discussion points for some of you maybe that are going to be talking about housing with some of your fellow real estate practitioners and you want to kind of clear the air about the facts. Remember, the notes from today's podcast are available at harrisrealestatedaily.com. harrisrealestatedaily.com is our free daily newsletter. So just subscribe to harrisrealestatedaily.com and you will get all the notes, and we email them to you every day, as well as all the notes from previous podcasts. Have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.